My grandfather Reuben had never been wrong about anything that mattered. Not once in my 32 years of knowing him. He'd predicted the flood of '09 3 days before the weather service. He'd told me not to take the job in Denver because the company would fold within a year, and it did. He'd known my high school girlfriend was cheating on me before I'd even suspected. So when he pressed that manila envelope into my palm during Sunday dinner, his weathered hands trembling against mine, I knew my life was about to change forever. The dining room was alive with its usual chaos. My 4-year-old nephew Tommy was standing on his chair, wielding a green bean like a sword, while his twin brother Ben laughed so hard he nearly choked on his milk. My sister Penny was trying to wrestle Tommy back down while her husband Derek filmed the whole thing on his phone. Mom was bringing in another basket of her famous dinner rolls, and Dad was in the middle of a story about a customer who'd tried to return a hammer he'd bought in 1987. But Grandpa Reuben wasn't watching any of it. His blue eyes, still sharp as broken glass at 78, were locked on mine. He leaned in close enough that I could smell the Old Spice cologne he'd worn since before I was born, the same scent that had meant safety and wisdom my entire life. "Don't open this here, Colton," he whispered, his voice barely audible over Tommy's shrieking laughter. His grip on my wrist was stronger than it should have been for a man his age. "Go home. Pack a bag. Pack it tonight." I started to ask what he meant, but he cut me off with a look I'd never seen before. Fear. My grandfather, who'd worked the rails for 40 years, who'd pulled 2 men from a derailed freight car, who'd faced down a black bear with nothing but a tire iron, was afraid. His eyes darted toward the dining room window where Mom's lace curtains swayed. There was no breeze tonight. The windows were closed against the October chill. "They're watching you," he said, pressing the envelope harder into my palm. "You have 24 hours, not a minute more." "Grandpa, what are you talking about?" But Tommy chose that moment to fling mashed potatoes across the table, hitting Derek square in the face. The room erupted in chaos, Mom scolding, Penny apologizing, Dad laughing despite himself. When I looked back at Grandpa, he'd already turned away, reaching for the gravy boat like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just handed me what felt like a ticking bomb. The envelope burned against my palm, hidden under the table. Through the paper, I could feel something hard and rectangular, like a key. My grandfather, the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, to tie a fishing line, to change a tire in the rain, had just told me to run. And when Reuben Bridges told you something mattered, you listened. I am Colton Bridges. I'm a small-town veterinarian who spends my days birthing calves and vaccinating farm dogs. My biggest worry this morning was whether Mrs. Patterson's tabby cat would need surgery for its infected tooth. I drive a 10-year-old pickup truck, rent a 1-bedroom apartment above the bakery on Main Street, and haven't missed a Sunday dinner at my parents' house in 5 years. But as I sat there, envelope hidden in my lap, watching my family pass around dessert plates and argue about whether pumpkin or apple pie was superior, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my life was about to shatter. Because Grandpa Reuben had never been wrong about anything that mattered. And he'd just told me to run. Sunday dinners at my parents' house in Cedar Falls had been tradition since before I could walk. Every week, the same routine played out like a comfortable symphony. Mom's pot roast would fill the house with rosemary and garlic. Dad would complain about the Cowboys' latest game, and we'd all gather around the same oak dining table that had belonged to my great-grandmother. I'd been coming here for 3 decades, watching the dining room walls yellow with age, watching the family photos multiply across the mantel, watching my parents' hair turn from brown to gray to white. That particular Sunday started like any other. My mother, Joyce, had called twice that morning to make sure I was coming. "Your grandfather specifically asked if you'd be here," she'd said, which wasn't unusual. Grandpa Reuben and I had always shared a special bond. After Grandma Rose died 5 years ago, I was the one who helped him sort through her things, finding love letters from World War II tucked between recipe cards and photographs of places I'd never seen. I drove him to his doctor appointments every other Thursday, listening to his stories about working the rails for 40 years, about the people he'd met and the things he'd seen rolling across America's backbone. The two-story colonial house sat on Maple Avenue just like it had since 1994, when Dad bought it with his first profits from the hardware store. The front door still stuck in humid weather, the third stair still creaked no matter where you stepped, and Mom's collection of ceramic roosters still dominated every horizontal surface in the kitchen. These constants had anchored my life through college, through veterinary school, through my brief failed engagement to Amanda, through building my practice one sick animal at a time. When I arrived at 5:30, the house was already full. Penny had gotten there early with Derek and the twins, commandeering the kitchen to help Mom while the boys ransacked the toy box Mom kept in the living room, specifically for their weekly destruction. Derek sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone, occasionally laughing at something the boys did. He'd been part of the family for 8 years now, ever since he'd swept Penny off her feet at the insurance conference in Des Moines. The funny thing was how perfectly he'd fit in from day one, like he'd always been meant to occupy that exact space on our couch, drinking Dad's beer and nodding along to stories he'd heard a dozen times before. "Colton's here," Mom announced unnecessarily as I walked in, wiping her hands on the apron I'd given her for Christmas 15 years ago. She hugged me like she hadn't seen me in months instead of just last Sunday, then immediately started fussing about how thin I looked. "Are you eating enough? I know that apartment of yours doesn't have a real kitchen. You should move back home, save some money." "Mom, I'm 32, and I have a real kitchen. A hot plate and a microwave don't count," she said, pushing me toward the dining room. "Your father's in there pretending to set the table, but really just moving things around to look busy, and your grandfather's been asking about you every 10 minutes. I found Grandpa Reuben in his usual spot, the chair at the head of the table that had been his since Dad officially passed him the position 5 years ago. He looked good for 78, still broad-shouldered from decades of manual labor, his white hair still thick enough to need regular barbering. But something was different today. He kept checking his watch, an old Timex he'd worn since 1975. His fingers drummed against the table in a rhythm I didn't recognize. "There's my boy," he said when he saw me, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Come sit by me." The conversation flowed around us as the family gathered. Penny talked about the twins starting kindergarten, how Tommy had already been in trouble twice for what the teacher diplomatically called excessive creativity. Dad complained about lumber prices and the big box store that was trying to move into town. Mom fluttered between kitchen and dining room, recruiting various family members to ferry dishes. Derek told a story about a claim he'd investigated, something about a man who'd tried to commit insurance fraud by setting his own boat on fire, but forgot to remove his lucky fishing hat first. But through it all, Grandpa kept asking me odd questions. "Colton, you still driving that old Ford pickup?" "Yes, I was." "You remember where I taught you to fish, down by Miller's Creek?" "Of course I did." "You still have that camping gear I gave you?" "It was in my apartment closet." "You remember the story about the railroad switch that saved 18 lives?" I'd heard it 100 times. Each question felt weighted with something more, like he was checking off items on a list only he could see. The dining room suddenly felt smaller, the familiar walls pressing in with secrets I couldn't quite grasp. The envelope came after dessert, during the chaos of clearing plates. Mom had just brought out her famous brown butter apple pie when Grandpa stood up, supposedly to help with the dishes. His hand landed firm on my shoulder. "Come give me a hand in the kitchen, Colton." I followed him, carrying a stack of gravy-stained plates. The kitchen still smelled like pot roast and cinnamon, familiar scents that should have been comforting, but suddenly felt like a goodbye I didn't understand yet. Grandpa waited until the swinging door closed behind us, muffling the sound of Tommy and Ben arguing over who got the last piece of pie. That's when he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength, his fingers pressing hard enough to leave marks. "Listen carefully," he said, pulling a manila envelope from inside his cardigan. The envelope was worn at the edges, like he'd been carrying it for weeks, maybe months. Your life isn't what you think it is, neither is mine. He pressed it into my hand, and I could feel something hard inside, rectangular and metallic. There's a key taped inside. Storage Unit 47 at Riverside Facility. Everything you need to know is there. Grandpa, what are you talking about? I tried to open it right there, my fingers already working at the sealed flap, but he stopped me with both hands over mine. Not here! The urgency in his voice made me freeze. I'd never heard him sound like that. Not even when I was 8 and had almost stepped on a copperhead snake. They've been patient for 20 years, but something's changed. They know about you now. Before I could ask who they were, the kitchen door swung open. Derek walked in carrying 2 pie plates, but he stopped when he saw us. His eyes moved from Grandpa's face to mine, then down to the envelope in my hands. For just a second, something flickered across his expression. Not surprise, recognition. "Everything okay in here?" he asked, but his tone was different from the easygoing brother-in-law voice I'd known for 8 years. There was an edge to it, sharp and calculating. Grandpa immediately switched gears, his whole posture changing as he laughed. "Just giving Colton an old recipe of your grandmother's. Boy can't cook worth a damn. Burned water once, didn't you, son?" I forced myself to play along, sliding the envelope into my jacket pocket. That was one time, and the pot was defective. Derek smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He set the pie plates in the sink slowly, deliberately, like he was buying time to think. "Family recipes, those are important to preserve. You never know when you might need them." The way he said it made my skin crawl. He held my gaze for a moment too long before turning to the sink. Grandpa's hand found my elbow, squeezing once. A warning. "We should get back," Grandpa said cheerfully. "Joyce will wonder where we've disappeared to." The rest of dinner passed in a blur. I couldn't focus on anything except the envelope burning a hole in my pocket. Every time Derek looked my way, my heart rate spiked. Was I imagining the way he kept watching me? The way his questions seemed probing? "So, Colton, any interesting cases at the clinic lately? Taking any time off soon? You ever think about moving somewhere new, starting fresh?" Penny noticed nothing, laughing at his jokes, passing him the cream for his coffee. Mom bustled around offering seconds on dessert. Dad launched into a story about a customer who'd tried to return a used toilet plunger. Normal Sunday dinner conversation, except nothing felt normal anymore. The drive home was torture. Every car behind me could be following. Each set of headlights in my rearview mirror held potential threat. I took 3 unnecessary turns, doubled back twice, and finally pulled into my apartment complex from the back entrance. The envelope sat on my passenger seat like a live bomb. Inside my apartment, I locked the door, slid the deadbolt, and pulled every blind closed. Only then did I tear open the envelope with shaking hands. 3 items fell onto my kitchen counter. First, a brass key with 47 stamped on it, just as promised. Second, a photograph, old and slightly yellowed, showing a young woman I didn't recognize standing next to Grandpa in his railroad uniform, except he looked different somehow, younger but also harder. Third, a single sheet of paper with 5 words written in Grandpa's careful handwriting. "Your father isn't your father." I stared at those words until they blurred. My legs gave out and I sank into a kitchen chair. Wayne Bridges had raised me. He'd taught me to throw a baseball badly. He'd been there for every school play, every graduation, every milestone. His hardware store savings had helped pay for veterinary school. But apparently, none of that made him my father. The brass key caught the overhead light, throwing golden reflections across my wall. Storage Unit 47. Whatever truth Grandpa had hidden there had been waiting 20 years to destroy everything I thought I knew about myself. The storage unit was across town, but I couldn't go immediately. Grandpa had said I had 24 hours, which meant he must have had a reason for the delay. Maybe the facility would be watched at night. Maybe whoever they were would expect me to rush there immediately. I forced myself to think strategically, the way Grandpa had taught me when we'd played chess during those long summers at the lake. I spent the night packing a bag, following his instructions to the letter. 3 changes of clothes, all practical and forgettable. My passport, which I dug out from the filing cabinet where it had sat untouched since that trip to Canada 5 years ago. Every bit of cash I could gather, $200 from my emergency fund hidden in a coffee can, another $500 from my checking account via the ATM, my laptop, phone charger, and the backup drive that contained my whole digital life. The veterinary medical kit from my truck, because my instincts said I might need antibiotics and sutures more than extra socks. My hands shook as I folded shirts. What kind of danger required a passport? What kind of truth demanded I abandon everything? At 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and sat at my kitchen table, studying the photograph again. The woman beside Grandpa was beautiful in that timeless way, with dark hair pinned back and intelligent eyes that reminded me of someone. It took me an hour to realize they reminded me of my own eyes in the mirror. Same shape, same unusual green color that everyone always commented on. Neither Mom nor Dad had green eyes. I called the veterinary clinic at 6 a.m., leaving a message on the answering service. "This is Colton. I've got severe food poisoning, probably from bad seafood. I'll need someone to cover my appointments for the next few days. I'll call when I can." The lie came easier than it should have. The drive to Riverside Storage took me through the industrial part of Cedar Falls, past the abandoned textile mill and the railroad tracks where Grandpa had worked for so many years. I took 3 different routes, doubling back twice, watching for anyone following. A trick Grandpa had taught me when I was 16 and thought my ex-girlfriend's new boyfriend was stalking me. "Never go straight anywhere if you think you're being watched," he'd said. Make them work for it. Make them expose themselves. Unit 47 was in the back corner of the facility, covered in dust and spider webs like it hadn't been opened in years. The key turned stiffly in the lock. Inside, illuminated by a single pull-chain bulb, were dozens of banker's boxes, each one labeled with dates going back to 1999. At the very back, a small fireproof safe sat on a wooden table. I started with the box labeled 2001-2002, Transition Period. Inside were documents that made my head spin. Legal papers with Department of Justice seals, Witness Protection Program agreements, and a birth certificate for Colton James Novak, born March 15, 1993. My birthday, but not my name. The story unfolded through documents and photographs, each revelation hitting harder than the last. My real father was Felix Novak, an accountant who'd worked for the Moretti crime family in Chicago. He'd gathered evidence for 2 years before testifying in a federal case that sent Anthony Moretti and 6 others to prison. The woman in the photograph was his sister Elena, who'd been murdered 3 weeks after the trial ended, a warning that the family's reach extended beyond prison walls. My mother's real name was Joyce Henley. She'd been Felix's girlfriend, already 3 months pregnant when he entered witness protection. The marshals had relocated her to Iowa, given her a new identity, and arranged for her to meet Wayne Bridges, a lonely hardware store owner who'd never asked too many questions about her past. Wayne had married her knowing she was pregnant, had raised me as his own, but the documents suggested he'd never known the full truth about why she'd needed a fresh start. And Grandpa Reuben? He wasn't my grandfather at all. He was Marshal Reuben Chase, Felix's former handler, who'd retired from the service and relocated to Cedar Falls to keep watch over us. Every fishing trip, every chess game, every lesson about being aware of my surroundings, he'd been training me for a moment he'd hoped would never come. The safe's combination was my birthday, just as I'd guessed. Inside were 3 things that changed everything. First, $50,000 in cash, bundled in worn bills. Second, a loaded Glock 19 with 2 extra magazines, which I stared at like it might bite me. I was a veterinarian. The only shots I'd ever given were vaccines to dairy cows. Third, a burner phone that rang the moment I picked it up. Colton? Grandpa's voice was different now. Professional, clipped, all business. No longer the retired railroad worker, but the federal marshal he'd apparently always been. Is any of it real? My voice cracked like I was 13 again. Any of our life? The love was real, he said quickly. Everything that mattered was real. But listen now, we don't have much time. Derek found something. Grandpa's voice continued through the burner phone. 3 weeks ago, someone tried to mail a letter to your clinic. We've been intercepting Felix's attempts to contact you for years, but this one got through to Derek first. He's not who you think he is, Colton. He married Penny to get close to your family. The Morettis never forgot what your father did to them. My mind raced back through 8 years of memories. Derek at family barbecues, teaching the twins to throw a football. Derek helping Dad rebuild the deck. Derek holding Penny's hand in the hospital when Tommy and Ben were born. He's been with us for 8 years. The twins call him Daddy. The long game, that's how these families work. Generation to generation, debt to debt, blood for blood. Where's Felix now? My real father? We don't know. That's the problem. That letter proved he's alive, and now they know it too. There's a bus ticket in the safe. It leaves in 2 hours. Someone will meet you in Memphis. I was shoving cash into my backpack when I heard footsteps on the gravel outside. Slow, deliberate, not trying to hide. I clicked off the overhead bulb and peered through a crack in the storage unit door. Derek stood 20 feet away, hands in his pockets, looking more sad than threatening. I know you're in there, Colton, he called out. I'm alone. We need to talk. I could have stayed hidden, could have waited him out, but something in his voice made me open the door. He stood there in his Sunday jacket, the one Penny had bought him for their anniversary. Just my brother-in-law, just Derek. You couldn't just leave it alone, he said, stepping closer but keeping his hands visible. 20 years we waited, watching, making sure Felix never came back. And then I meet Penny at that conference, legitimately fall in love with her laugh before I even knew her last name. Can you believe that? Sent to spy on the Bridges family, and I fall in love with the target's daughter on accident. So, everything was a lie. No. He shook his head firmly. That's what I'm trying to tell you. I convinced them to let it go. Told the family that Felix was probably dead, that you knew nothing, that punishing Wayne's son for Felix's betrayal would gain us nothing. Uncle Anthony agreed. He's old now, dying of cancer in prison. He doesn't care about ancient vendettas anymore. But I kept my hand near the backpack where I'd placed the Glock, though I had no intention of using it. But then last month, Felix tried to contact you. A letter to your clinic about meeting, about explaining everything. We intercepted it, but it proved he was still alive, still out there. The family couldn't let that stand. You're his blood. In our world, that debt passes father to son. So you were going to kill me? Your wife's brother? Your kid's uncle? Derek's face twisted with something like pain. Not kill, never kill, just leverage, to draw Felix out. He'd come for you, try to save you. He's that kind of man, from what I've learned. But Colton, I need you to understand something. I called them already. Told them you were at the storage facility on Birch Street, the one across town. They're heading there now. I stared at him. Why would you do that? Because I've got 2 boys who love their Uncle Colton. They beg to go to your clinic to see the animals. They draw you pictures every week that Penny puts on our fridge, because Penny would never forgive me if something happened to you. Because 20 years of Sunday dinners should count for something, even in my family's twisted accounting. He pulled a set of keys from his pocket and tossed them to me. Gray Honda Civic parked behind the building. Registration's clean, belonged to a college kid who sold it for cash last week. Papers are in the glove box. Reuben arranged it because that paranoid old marshal really did think of everything. Derek, if they find out you let me go, they'll kill you. No, they won't. I'm too valuable, married too deep into your family, but they'll make me watch them hurt Penny to punish me, which is worse." His voice broke slightly. "So you need to run. Now, fast and far, and you can never contact any of them again. Not your mom, not Penny, not the twins. Colton Bridges needs to die today." How do I know this isn't another trick? Derek pulled out his phone, showed me a tracking app. 3 red dots were converging on a building across town. "Because in about 10 minutes, they're going to realize you're not there. And then they'll check here, so stop asking questions and run." I grabbed the backpack and the evidence boxes. At the door, I turned back one more time. "Take care of them, all of them. With my life," Derek said, and I believed him. "Now go, become someone else. Live a life Felix would be proud of, even if he never gets to see it." I ran to the gray Honda, threw everything in the trunk, and drove away from Cedar Falls for what I knew would be the last time. In the rearview mirror, I saw Derek standing in the storage unit doorway, already on his phone, playing his part in the elaborate theater that would keep my family safe. The highway stretched ahead, leading to Memphis or wherever else I decided to go. Colton Bridges was dead. Whoever I became next would have to be enough. The gray Honda handled differently than my pickup, lower to the ground, more anonymous in the stream of morning traffic. Memphis was 10 hours away, but I didn't go to Memphis. That was too obvious, too predictable. Instead, I drove north to a small town in Iowa where Grandpa had once mentioned an old friend lived, back when I thought he was just telling railroad stories. The friend turned out to be another former marshal, a woman named Catherine who ran a diner and had documents ready with my new name. Nathan Frost, traveling livestock inspector. A job that would keep me moving, never staying in one place long enough for anyone to notice the veterinarian who treated their cattle had the same unusual green eyes as a ghost named Felix Novak. 3 months later, I got a postcard at my mail drop in Minnesota. The picture showed the Cedar Falls water tower, and on the back, in Grandpa's careful handwriting, "The weather's been clear, no storms expected, the garden's growing well. Code 4, you're safe, they've stopped looking, the family is okay." I kept that postcard along with the photo of Felix and Elena, my father and aunt. People I'd never meet but whose choices shaped my entire existence. Felix, who'd found the courage to stand up to killers. Elena, who'd paid the price for his bravery. Sometimes, late at night, in whatever motel room I was staying in, I'd study their faces and wonder if Felix ever knew what happened to me. Did he know his son became a veterinarian? Did he know I'd inherited his sense of right and wrong, even if I'd never known it came from him? But mostly, I thought about Sunday dinners, about Mom's pot roast with too much salt that everyone pretended was perfect, about Dad and his hardware store wisdom, the man who raised me, knowing I wasn't his blood, but loving me anyway, never letting that knowledge change how he threw himself into being my father. I thought about Penny's twins, Tommy and Ben, who'd grow up without their Uncle Colton but with Derek protecting them from shadows they'd never know existed. About Derek himself, who chose love over loyalty to a twisted code, who saved me knowing it would cost him everything if discovered. The veterinary practice I'd built in Cedar Falls found a new doctor within 2 weeks. Dr. Sarah Chen, fresh from Iowa State, eager and competent. Mrs. Patterson's cat got its surgery. The farmers found someone else to call at 2 a.m. when their cows had trouble birthing. Life moved on without Colton Bridges, as it should have, as it needed to. I still drive past Cedar Falls sometimes, though I never stop. The highway passes close enough that I can see the exit sign, Cedar Falls, next right. Such a simple turn that I can never take. Once, I was heading through on a Sunday evening and couldn't help myself. I pulled off at a rest stop and climbed the hill behind it. From there, I could see the neighborhood spread out like a quilt, could almost pick out Maple Avenue where my family was probably just sitting down to dinner. 6 o'clock, that's when we always ate. Mom would be fussing about something not being quite right while everyone assured her it was perfect. Dad would be telling a story about the store. Penny would be trying to keep the twins in their seats. Derek would be there, playing the part of the perfect husband and father, which wasn't really playing anymore. And Grandpa Reuben, Marshall Reuben Chase, would be in his chair at the head of the table, probably checking his old Timex watch, keeping vigil even now. On Sunday evenings, wherever I am, I find myself sitting down to dinner at exactly 6 o'clock. Sometimes it's in a truck stop diner, sometimes in a small-town restaurant, sometimes just a sandwich in my car. But I always take that moment. I raise whatever I'm drinking and toast to the family I can't see anymore. The family that saved me by letting me go. The family that loved me enough to pretend I'd never existed so I could keep existing somewhere else. The envelope changed everything that night. Not because of the secrets it revealed, but because of the love that put it in my hands. Grandpa knew the storm was coming 20 years before it arrived. He'd spent decades preparing for it, teaching me to be aware, to be smart, to survive. Every fishing trip was a lesson. Every chess game was strategy. Every story about the rails was really about watching the tracks of your life for danger ahead. He made sure that when the storm finally came, I wouldn't just have an umbrella. I'd have a bunker, a new identity, and the skills to disappear. He gave me the gift of vanishing, which was really the gift of living. Somewhere out there, Felix Novak might still be alive, hiding under another name, carrying the same weight of abandoned family that I now carry. We're connected, father and son, by absence rather than presence. Both of us ghosts who chose survival over everything else, or had that choice made for us. But we survived, and sometimes that's the only victory you get. Thank you for listening to my story. If you found meaning in it, if it reminded you that family is more than blood and love is more than presence, please share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below about the sacrifices your family has made for you, the ones you know about, and the ones you probably never will. And subscribe to this channel for more stories about the extraordinary hidden in the ordinary, about the people who walk among us carrying secrets that would reshape everything we thought we knew. Until next time, remember that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is disappear.